Bonjour everyone, I am Anne-Lise Cailiez and welcome to Parlez-vous CEO, where we ditch the corporate talk and get real about entrepreneurship. Each week, I chat with founders and CEOs who build businesses their way, through the failures, pivots, and breakthroughs. And they bring the fire. Plus, I'll drop some golden nuggets of wisdom from my own entrepreneurial journey. This is your space to grow, learn, and evolve with a true growth mindset. Remember, success isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. Now let's kick things off and get this party started. Hello, bonjour, bonjour, hello. Welcome to another episode of Parlez-vous CEO. My name is Anne-Lise Cailiez and I am your host. For those who are just joining the podcast, we're Anne-Lise marketing partners and we specialize in helping female-led businesses scale their revenue. And if you want to learn how to take your business to the next level, make sure to stick around. And if you're interested in a free growth consultation, just drop the word growth in the DMs. And today I am really excited to have a very special guest with me, Dr. T. We are friends. We actually met at CrossFit and this girl is a killer. She can basically lift 4 times my weight. So Teresa, I am super excited to have you today, be our guest on Parlez-vous CEO. And in your own words, would you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure, of course. So I am Dr. T. I'm a New York City psychologist. I'm a writer. I am what I would like to call not serious CrossFitter, but she just put some weights out there, so I'm going to own that. Yeah, and the main thing is psychologist, writer.
That's awesome, Teresa. I'm really excited about this conversation because I love therapy and I love female-led businesses. So this is ticking all my boxes. So I'd love to know more about what you're trying to build and what you can share with our audience. Let us know why you had the idea to start a business by yourself. You were a therapist for a long time before. What made you to decide to go on your own? And also, what is your specialty exactly?
Okay, well, the decision was actually based on a conversation with my accountant. Because
Pragmatic.
Yeah. Well, I was working under my license. So in New York City and a lot of places, you can work under your license, meaning you can have your own practice and just use your name. So I was doing that for a while, but then for tax purposes, I was able to kind of save some stuff based on the name. So my business name would help me get some tax benefit. So I opened up a private practice, Pivot Psychological Services, in February 2024. I had to think about that. And it's been going really well because I've been trying to focus on figuring out how to expand. And that has been a very big learning curve for me as I've been working with, trying to figure out how the business works, how to structure it, how to kind of onboard people. And I'm still in the process of doing that. My biggest focus in my practice is anxiety. So I provide individual therapy for people, for adults that have anxiety. Part of my expansion with this has been partnering with Journey Clinical, and they essentially bridge a gap between medical providers and therapists to provide CAP, which is ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. And I feel like they do a really good job of doing that. So before pairing up with Journey Clinical, there was no real avenue for me to get into the CAP space. Being a member there has given me access to essentially providers. So that's been a good collaboration.
And I want to go back to the name of the company, Pivot. I love this word. I always say, because I use it a lot and probably every day when I'm trying to reframe some thoughts that I have, especially negative thoughts. So I tell myself a few times a day, pivot, pivot. So I love this word. My friends make fun of me for liking this word so much. Tell the people who are listening why you chose that name. And after that, can you tell us a bit more about ketamine treatment and why you specifically chose this avenue?
Yeah, so pivot is a really central part of the theory that I use. I use acceptance commitment theory, which is the acronym is ACT. And pivoting is essential to the therapeutic approach. So it's in part you're walking away from things that are not useful, and it's kind of like a focal point of the therapy. There are different aspects of it, of course, and we can dive into the clinical piece if you want, but I feel like that is the very kind of base level introduction to why I chose that name.
So what is the high level, like without going necessarily into the deep diving into the psychologic lingo, what is the high level of what you're doing with anxiety and the idea behind pivot?
Yeah, so with CBT, for example, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of the things that go into that approach are basically kind of logicking yourself out of things. And what I love about ACT is there really doesn't have to be a conversation. Really don't have to get yourself to the point of believing something different. So an example would be, well, the example that I use often is, I'm going to die. You're going to die. We're all going to die. That's a fact. We don't have to argue about it. We all know it. How useful is it for us to think about it? You know, like that's kind of the pivot, right? So even if it's a fact, and sometimes our thoughts aren't facts, and generally they're not facts, but I'm taking a fact, right? And I'm saying, okay, useful to my day-to-day existence is it to think about this? And can I walk away from the thought? Right? That's kind of the essence of the pivot. So it's not necessarily going into, well, I could do affirmations, I can do this or that, which is like cognitive stuff. Walking away from the cognitive and just saying, okay, this is futile. This isn't helping me at all.
So, for instance, the example that you're using, we're all going to die, you're going to die, I'm going to die. So, is that something that you would say can be useful to think about here and there to put things in perspective? Or would you say it tends to be toxic if you're thinking about that too much?
It's useful only in the sense of how do I want to spend my time alive? So that's also a pivot, right? So it's not about the end of the life. It's about how do I want to live while I'm alive?
I love that. This is profound. And so going back to ketamine treatment, can you share with our people listening today, what is ketamine treatment? How does it work? What have you seen as well have been really helpful to your patients after they've done this treatment or as they are doing the treatment?
Yeah, so ketamine treatment is generally termed for treatment resistant stuff and generally for depression. So what's considered treatment resistant depression. And that's kind of like the main hook for the treatment approach, but it's really helpful for lots of things. The reason why I kind of ventured into the space is because I feel like it has a lot to do with how do we create change faster. And what ketamine actually does is it breaks down essentially psychological barriers and defenses that we have put into place a really long time ago in order to create actual flexibility, like literal flexibility in the brain as well. So it fits perfectly with my approach because my approach is psychological flexibility. The purpose of ACT is getting a person to psychological flexibility. And the inception of the approach was actually because of anxiety. And so the ketamine fits perfectly because it creates literal flexibility. So it just kind of like went hand in hand with each other. And I really do believe that there has to be something that gets us to progress faster. If it's done appropriately with ketamine, the person has to allow or give themselves permission to bring down those barriers. So it's not necessarily a forceful kind of barricading through psychological barriers, even though that sounds great as well. But it's more of a, if you're taking the steps, for example, to do a medical intake, and then to get the prescription, and then to come in and plan for this, and then set goals, and then do it, you're in control of the whole process and you're allowing yourself to give permission to go wherever it is that you're going to go. And really, you're setting an intention, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that's where you're going to go. It just means that, okay, this is where I intend to go, but then you'll go wherever you need to go, essentially. But the breaking down the barriers and the flexibility is the reason why I got into the work.
Could you tell us more about what you call psychological flexibility?
Yeah, of course. So everything to do with anxiety is about fear, power, control. And so a lot of that comes in with rigidity. So when a person is fixated on doing the same thing or having this be the same way or wanting control in a very specific way or wanting control over the things that they can't control, that's inflexible. And along with a pivot, you'd have to see it a different way in order to change it. So the flexibility comes with, an example would be, you get to JFK for a flight and they tell you, okay, your flight is canceled. There's a range of reactions that you can have. And it would be awesome if you accepted that you don't have control over that. The flight is canceled. You're not going to make the flight go. I mean, unless you're a pilot and have access to a plane and all of that. But accepting that can allow you to be flexible in the moment and make conscious decisions. And so that flexibility of, well, initially you can have a reaction, right? Because it's an upsetting thing, especially if you're going somewhere fun. But then being able to step into the present moment and saying, okay, this flight isn't happening. what do I want to do now is kind of like the flexibility versus kind of sitting in upset and not really doing anything.
So it's essentially it's a propensity for adapting quickly to situations. Yes, you can still feel upset, like, oh, my flight, but then quickly, say, okay, what's next? What can I do now? Instead of just like getting stuck in the loop of like, oh my God, my life, I miss my flight.
Yeah.
So Teresa, please share with our listeners, what was your first patient experience like?
Okay. So what I remember, because first of all, I've been studying psychology. I don't know if you know this, right? I've been studying psychology for 100 years. I decided to be a psychologist in high school. So it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, you knew.
I went to undergrad for psychology. I had a massive discrepancy between my GPA with like regular GPA and psychology GPA that really messed me up for, I don't know if I could swear. Can I swear here?
You can do whatever you want. I'm French after all.
That really fucked me up for applying for my PhD. So I had to do a master's. I did a master's in forensic psychology in Springfield, Massachusetts. And then I went to do my PhD in forensic psychology in California. And that's where I actually had my first patients, was at a clinic in Fresno, California, at the school that I was studying. I don't remember the very first patient I had.
Shame on you.
I do remember I was just fucking petrified, like it was almost like I was getting on stage. I've been preparing for this for fucking ever. So like, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what, and then it was just the first person in this one clinic, and I remember what it felt like to call the patient who was in the waiting room, bring the patient back, and I'm walking and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I had no idea what I was doing because I didn't have any practice doing it. It's one of those chicken and egg problems. So I really think it was a guy, like an older gentleman. And we sat down, and it was a bare room because the clinic was for students, right? And it was reduced cost and all this other stuff. And we're sitting there, and for the first session, there's like a protocol intake, yada, yada, yada. So I'm asking prescribed questions, and I'm like, wow, doing it. And the blend of, I know how to ask these questions and I have no idea what I'm doing, was just terrifying and amazing. And I will never forget the feeling of, I have no idea what I'm doing here. And that doesn't necessarily go away. You just kind of get used to, yeah, I don't know what to say about this right now. First of all, and I always tell my patients, I've heard it all. Because you end up hearing it all, right? So at some point, you've heard a version of this human experience that they're talking about. But then sometimes you get, left field stuff. And I'm like, I know I have to respond to this and I have no idea what to say. And I feel like that's when I say, how did that make you feel? Just don't tell my patients that.
All right, so good to know. People listening, if a shrink is telling you, how does that make you feel? You know, they have no idea what you're talking about.
If any of my patients listen to this, it hasn't been anything that you have said. It was another patient.
Of course, goes without saying. So there is you were a therapist for a long time before, and then you switched to being your own founder, your own entrepreneur. And what has felt like the most challenging thing from being a therapist to being a business owner?
They don't teach you business stuff.
It's a very different set of skills. That's why I'm really curious as to what was the main pain point for you as you started your business.
So a lot of it had to do with financial stuff and really figuring out what that meant, because for a long time I was married to someone that did all of the things. So I was married to someone that did the finances, separated for taxes, did X, Y, and Z. And then I got a divorce, which was the best thing that happened to me, I guess is the best way of saying that. And kind of getting the most challenging thing was getting my footing with financial things and establishing the business, essentially getting the paperwork in, making sure that all of the things were in place with the state and names and S corp and all of these things that I had no idea what they were until I had to just do it.
Yeah, and for the people who are just thinking about maybe starting their own practice, how did you make that happen? How did you find someone to help or a company to help you? How did you get that sorted?
I actually should have maybe outsourced that. And I didn't. A lot of the things that I did were very kind of one step at a time, very granular, very methodical, and just essentially looking at things online, especially with having a psychology practice. I have to have certain things in line, especially with an approval of the name. Pivot had to be approved by the board in order for me to have it. So very kind of one step at a time. I couldn't just open the business without the approval of the name and knowing what step to take first. I just did the research on my own, even though it might have been helpful if someone else just did it for me. Yeah.
And so if you were to do it all over again, would you do it the same way and just buckle through it and do it yourself? Or would you now think, I'm going to find someone to set that up for me? I'm not going through that again.
I feel like if I were to do it again, I would get someone. But I appreciate that I did it the first time. So if I were to go back in time, I would do the exact same thing. But if I were to open up another practice, it's like, I don't need to do that again. But that's just the type of person I am. I have to go through the experience first.
I'm the same. I love testing things once and setting up things once, and then I'm happy to train my team to do it. But I like to understand the ins and outs of each campaign, how to set it up, new technology. I like to meet people I'm hiring. So I'm all for delegating, but I like doing things at least once. And once I master the process, then I train someone to do it. So I understand completely.
Yeah.
And Teresa, do you have anybody in the industry, or not necessarily in the industry, that you're looking up to, either a business leader or a celebrity or a writer that inspires you? Or different way to ask this, If you could have a dream dinner guest, and that can be someone deceased, who would that person be?
God, Freud. Sigmund Freud. So that's such an interesting story. I have a 4-degree of separation with Freud. My professor, who is now deceased as well, he was taught by a guy that was taught by Carl Jung, who was taught by Freud, even though, they have competing theories or whatever, but 4 degrees of separation. The the feud between Freud and Jung.
The drama. We want the drama.
It's a little bit over 100-year-old problem that these two guys had, where Freud had this theory of, surrounding sexual development, which he did the psychosexual development stages, and that's where we get terms like fixation, where we get the name ego, the id, the ego, the superego. And he was having this bromance with Jung, who was younger than him at the time. And they were writing these whole love letters. They're like sharing these like intimate thoughts and ideas about patients, about theories, about this. And I feel like Freud wanted Jung to be a little Freudian, right? Like a little him. And he just couldn't. I feel like the biggest rupture with that was Jung sleeping with his client, with his patient. So there, and there's been movies and this and that that's been kind of talked about. But Jung had this affair essentially with one of his patients, and Freud was like, you can't do that. And that was one of the many different things that kind of separated them in practice. But in theory, there's lots of things that separate them. And I mean, that's where they're two different theories. Psychoanalysis is Freudian, analysis is Jungian, and Jung goes into a lot of collective consciousness theory and, collective unconscious. And Freud goes into the personal. And once you get out of the personal, you step into Jung's work. Yeah.
And so you wouldn't invite both, you would only invite Freud?
For a threesome, I would invite Freud and Jung, yes. That would be one interesting, yeah.
Ménage.
Yeah.
Mhm. So it's the same thing with you. I invite you on my podcast and you bring the drama and the sex stories.
Hey, nothing but sexy times over here.
So it happens when you...
Back to pole dancing.
Yes, we should. After my shoulder injury, I injured myself doing CrossFit. And mind you, I'm not doing it on a competitive level. I was doing just training on pull-ups and I managed to hurt myself. But yes, I am down to go back to pole dancing.
Don't downplay that. You badass CrossFitter. All of a sudden I would be doing something and she's like doing the exercises way ahead of me. And I'm like, what is happening here?
That's probably because I do less reps or lighter reps.
Right. That's after I found out that you're cheating. I'm like,
that's right.
What is that? He's on the next thing. Maybe I should go fast.
You do the competition level. I do the foundational level.
No, I do prescribed. I do RX.
I only discovered recently that there were 3 levels. I was always doing less than everybody, but I kind of choose your own program. And it's only recently that I understood the 3 tiers.
It's always the
Years
do
later.
what you want. And
That's right.
and I'm getting the weights that are prescribed. It's like, and then you're like, why are you doing so much more weight? And I'm like, it says 35. I'm doing
Why are you doing this? You're going to
35.
sweat and you're going to get so tired. Yeah, that's the difference between, like some, like different people at CrossFit, different profiles. And so, Teresa, I know you are writing a book and you also recently launched a podcast. Would you share with our listeners a little bit more about this project?
Yes, I would love to. So I finished a memoir, and I finished it at the end of 2024, and I'm currently in the stage of waiting for the illustration, the cover. I have it formatted and all these other things. That's just kind of waiting for the final cover. And the name of the book is called Processing. It's about my relationship and essentially relationships and the end of my marriage and how I process that. I'm really excited about it. And I'm very much looking forward to putting it out there. I have decided to continue writing about my life as I'm learning along the way. So right now I'm in the process of writing another memoir, and I'm writing a sci-fi novel as well. That's more to do with just going into creative writing and taking in information from the information that I like to take in is spiritual. So a lot of the things that I'm hearing are overlapping, like about the future or channelers or future forecasting. And because I'm listening to so much information, I'm getting an image or a picture of what the future might look like. So I'm writing a sci-fi novel, and it's pretty cool. Just for the fun, it's pretty cool for the fun of it.
Oh, that seems fun.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to both. And so, Dr. T, tell us a bit more about your writing project.
Okay, so the other writing project I have going on is a play. I'm co-writing with an actor, and it's from her real life. So it's her relationship with 3 different men in her life: her father, her psychoanalyst, and her now husband, and the interplay of those male relationships in her life that were very impactful and significant. And the play is a personal project for her that is very, very interesting to play out, especially because she's writing so much of the work being done in the therapy room and how that therapeutic relationship evolved into something that was, I guess I would call it dicey. But between her, dicey in the sense of there was a lot of sexual tension between her and her psychoanalyst that was played out in a specific way that basically created a rupture for the therapeutic relationship. And being able to write about it from the perspective of the person on the couch, but also I'm bringing the perspective of the person on the chair. So together we're creating something that is really relevant, because a lot of the things that happen in the therapy room are closed door. I don't I feel like that has to change, because when you close the door on something, creates a sort of secrecy, right? And sometimes, or a lot of the times, people don't know what is supposed to be happening behind the door and what isn't supposed to be happening. And I feel going into the spaces of bringing awareness to what is and isn't supposed to happen in a therapeutic relationship is really something that is needed, necessary, and beautiful.
I love what you're saying, and I never really thought about that, because it's true, when you start therapy, you don't know what are the standard, what is normal, not normal, besides asking other people, hey, does your shrink say that? Or did you ever experience this? And so I like the idea of, I don't know if it's bringing transparency, but what you describe as, instead of secrecy, like having it more in the open and maybe more spoken of. So what would you say would need to be spoken of? What do you think are the areas where it's a bit some darkness around it and it can get complicated? What are the topics or the challenges that you're thinking about when you think about that?
Well, it's natural for certain people to be drawn to psychology, right? So, or being a therapist, and being able to bring awareness to the things that draw us to the field to begin with, as people that are the professionals, and having that awareness of, okay, what is my role? And the other side is allowing the public to know what our role is. So there are a lot of things that are not said about what happens in therapy and how we navigate what we say, because in essence, we have a lot of power, right? So a lot of the things that I do is guidance. So in the therapy room, meaning a lot of the things I do is guidance to you coming to your own answers. So I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to say, you should break up with this person. I may have the thought, have you thought about not? But that doesn't, I can't interject that, essentially, right? Because that's my own thought or opinion or fantasy, right? So you being able to decide, okay, this is what's coming up for me. This is how I feel. This is what I want to do. All of that has to come from you. And so the information about what happens behind the door should be a known thing that, your therapist isn't telling you what to do, isn't telling you the ways that you should live your life, because we don't know what's best for you. So it's more of a empowerment for you to realize you know what's best for you. And there's no one that's going to know you best than you. And applying the theory can help you uncover you better than I can uncover you, right? And so, yeah, and the other side to it is the disillusionment, right? There's a specific thing that happens in development where your parents go from being these gods, because they're massive giants. If we're talking about a 2-year-old, they're these gods that provide us with food and safety and security and all of the things that hopefully we were provided with, right? The disillusionment comes from recognizing, oh, you aren't a god in the terms that we conceptualize God. And if we want to go into personal divinity, we can go there, but trying to keep it streamlined. So there's a disillusionment with a parent that creates oh, you're a person. You're like a human being. And so is your. And so in that relating, my stuff will come up, your stuff will come up. There's an interaction of stuff. There's an exchange of information. I get information from patients. Patients get information from me, right? So there's an exchange. I have to be aware of what I'm putting out and what stuff is mine, hopefully more so than my patient, right? And so the introducing information to the public is, okay, your therapist is a human being, and that can be a disillusionment. So, yeah.
And so do you think that it's really important as a patient when you're about to choose your therapist? Do you think it's, for instance, if I pick an 80-year-old man to be my therapist, or if it's going to be a 20-year-old woman who is my therapist, do you think that the therapy is going to be drastically different, or would it either way be drastically different from one human to the other? Like, how do you pick your therapist is what I'm asking.
Well, that's actually the most important part, is the picking, because so they've done study after study about, what is effective treatment for patients. What is going to work? Is it going to be CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy? Is it going to be psychoanalysis? Is it going to be this other theory, Gestalt, existential, whatever the theory is, right? And when all of that gets boiled down to, it's the actual relationship. It's the therapeutic relationship. So I would say the most important part of it's the person that you're picking to be in relationship with. So no two people coming together will create the same thing. Just like if you look at previous partners, even though you might be coming in with the same dynamic, no two people coming together will create the same thing. So the most important piece is how you get on with your therapist and the relationship that you have.
How would you say that you found the right therapist for yourself? Like, what would be the I don't know if it's called success criteria or metrics, but how would you say, yeah, by the sound of it, it sounds like you found the right therapist for yourself?
I would say if you're comfortable being uncomfortable with them.
That's a good one. If you are comfortable being uncomfortable with them.
Because really, hopefully or ideally, the therapy will create a bit of a push. And that experience of the push is to get you out of your zone of comfort. When you step out of the zone of comfort, you want that person to be there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense for how important it is to pick the right drink for you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Dr. T, I want to call you Teresa, but I like the doctor.
You can call me whatever you want.
Tell us a bit more about your podcast.
Okay, so yes, my podcast. It's called Permission. It was originally going to be called Permission.
My cat just walked in front of the screen.
I love your cats. It was originally going to be called Permission Slip, and that changed because someone else had that name. And the idea behind the podcast is it's me and my sister, and we are talking about how we give ourselves permission to do things. And an example would be giving ourselves permission to do something through, let's say, astrology. Because I'm getting into astrology now. My birthday's coming up soon. Allowing myself to kind of read either the week ahead forecast for astrology or my sign or this or that, that would be an avenue that I can take to give myself permission to do something or prevent myself from doing something. So the permission can go both ways. And it's just the two of us having these conversations together about topics that, one, are really interesting for us, and two, that we find really important, that are meaningful, or that we feel are meaningful to talk about. As the age of consciousness keeps evolving, essentially. And so it's just the two of us. And what we do is we pick a topic, and sometimes we kind of have a reference point for the topic. Like, I listened to this thing and this is what brought it up. And sometimes we don't. And we're just having a conversation about it. Like, what do I think? What do you think? And I feel like the purpose of it is for people to start having conversations about it, if that makes sense.
It does. Congratulations. That's a fun endeavor, and I look forward to hearing more of it. I listened to the first one. That's a really cool project. I love the name, also Permission. And Dr. Teresa, where can people find you and what's coming up next for you?
Okay, so I have a website, pivotpsychologicalservices.com. The podcast is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon. I think those are the 3 places where you can find it. It is on social media, but my sister controls it because I'm very much averse to being on social media. And I guess what's next is basically my writing project. Yeah, that would be what's next.
That's exciting. Teresa, it was such a pleasure to have you today on the show, Parlez-vous CEO. What so insightful, and I'm sure it's going to be really helpful to our listeners who are thinking either about doing therapy or questioning whether they're working with the right therapist or ketamine treatment. And it was really insightful, and I'm sure our listeners definitely benefited from our conversation today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, you're awesome.
And that wraps up today's episode. I am Anne-Lise Cailiez, and I can't wait to join you again next week. Thanks for listening to Parlez-vous CEO today. If you enjoyed the show, leave a 5-star review. It helps us keep going. And connect with us on Instagram at Parlez-vous CEO. I am Anne-Lise Cailiez, and I know some days are harder than others. On those tough days, think back to why you started. What you're doing today matters, even when you can't see the results yet. Ideas are great, but it's what you do with them that counts. Find everything we talked about today at parlezvousceo.com. See you next week, and you've got this.